About 35 years ago, my wife needed to have a bunion removed from her foot. I called 5 places and the prices ranged $4,200 and the high price was $6,000. One that had told me it was $4,200 gave me a cash price of $1,556. The cost of the health care would only be about 1/3 of what it is now, which means health care would be much more affordable. If you drive a car, you have car insurance that pays for a wreck, but the car insurance doesn't pay for gasoline. We help low income people buy groceries by giving them food stamps. And food is more important than health care.
Welcome to the Wheel With It podcast with your host, Devin. Let's get into the episode.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of Wheel With It. And today we have Aubrey Cromwell with us today. How are you today, Aubrey?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
So tell us about yourself and then we will get started.
I'm now 77 years old. I have spent my career as a small business owner for the first 25 years. And in the last 25 years, I have been I've been an angel investor, having invested in over 60 different companies. Have had some successes and have had some, obviously, in that group, had some failures. And I also, around 1984, one of the companies that we launched was a company that produced audio programs on many of history's most influential thinkers. And the first series that we had was called The Giants of Political Thought. And back in those days, we actually sold them on cassette tapes, believe it or not.
I was going to make some kind of joke about, I actually know what a cassette tape is, but it didn't.
Good for you. They haven't been around for a long time. And then we kept selling them on cassette tapes. Then we put some of them on CDs, but then around 96 to 97, we believed that the internet would be the place that we would eventually have our programs available. And most of our customers listened to our programs in their cars. And so even though cars were moving from cassettes to CDs, CD players, there were still millions and millions of cars that had cassette players. So we continued to sell our product on cassette tapes really all the way until 2000. Then we mothballed that, and we now have it available on a streaming platform. And so if people are interested in the ideas of the people whose ideas have shaped our world for better and for worse, we go back. The very first one that we did in terms of historically is we covered The Prince by Machiavelli, which was in around 1500. And then we have John Locke, Two Treatises of Government, Adam Smith. We covered Alexis de Tocqueville, Karl Marx, Rousseau, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes, the Declaration of Independence, Common Sense. So it's and the programs that we do, what we try to do in the Giants of Political Thought is provide context so that the listeners can understand what was going on at the time that these thinkers lived, which helps explain why they thought the ideas that they thought. And so I think they're very useful. We try to make them entertaining as well as educational. And I appreciate you letting me talk about those.
So you're welcome. It's a good idea. So what made you want to start this?
That's a great question. I was not the world's most mature college student. And so by 1980...
I wasn't either, but we all made it, so it was good.
Well, by 1985, I realized that there was a giant gap in my understanding and my knowledge of which knowledge is the first thing you have to have. Then knowledge allows you to have understanding, and then understanding allows you to have wisdom. But if you don't have knowledge, then you can't possibly have understanding or wisdom. And so I said, there's a lot about the history of the world that I just don't know because I was too immature in college to study it as deeply as I should have. And so I said, I think there are probably a lot of people like me. And so we produced these audio programs for people who were just like me, who decided later in life, and by that time I was about 35 or 40, by later in life that they believed that they really needed to have an understanding of the power of ideas, and what better way to get that than to listen to the ideas that we now know had a great impact on the world.
Like, what's been the most popular one that people are like,
Well, the Giants of Political Thought we sold as a series, and that was the first series that we came out with, and that's the one that we have available today. The most popular, and only barely so, was the Giants of Philosophy, and that'll be the second series that we put up on streaming. And with the Giants of Philosophy, we go all the way back to Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and then we come up with a number of other philosophers. Mostly it's Western philosophy, starting with the Greek philosophers and coming up through the early 20th century.
what do you think about the political situation today?
Well, we're obviously, as a country, I think we're as divided politically as I've ever seen it in my lifetime, and that's a fairly long lifetime.
Are we really, or is the news just like making us?
I think there's a very large divide between you have people who are, I'm going to say, people on the right are for limited government, and I would describe it as free enterprise, although I think that's a confusing term these days. And then you have people like Zoran, who just got elected mayor of New York, who is a socialist. I mean, he is a self-described socialist, and just to make sure that's put in perspective, one of the things that he believes is, he says, ultimately the government should control the means of production. That phrase is actually a phrase of Karl Marx, and Karl Marx was a socialist. He was not. That people say Karl Marx was a communist. Karl Marx was first a socialist, and it was the communist form of government that would be necessary in order to have a socialist economy. And so Zoran Mamdani has been elected the mayor of New York because he has promised affordability, and that was a winning campaign message. And it'll be interesting to see if he can deliver affordability.
It will be. And honestly, I think I tend to lean more toward Republicans, but I think affordability is going to be huge in the next election because, just a personal example, I'm on winter assistance, so it's very manageable for me. But if I weren't on winter assistance, and this is not like, to put it, I don't know any other way to put it. This is not like a bougie, like luxury apartment. This is like an 800 square foot, like, starter apartment. The rent here is $1,700. I was like, this is a penthouse. Nobody can afford this. Well, a regular apartment. No wonder why people aren't buying houses and crap. Nobody can afford it.
Your point is a very good one, and it's right on target. The question that needs to be delved into is, why has the cost of living gone up so dramatically in the last 20 years? And I think the larger the government becomes, the greater amounts of spending, the more government costs, and the cost of government then percolates through all of the products that we buy. And so I've heard that 30 years ago, the cost of a house was 3 times the average income.
Oh,
And
wow.
now the cost of the average house is 7 times the average income.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, you also see it, as you pointed out, in the amount you pay in rent has also gone up considerably over the last 20 to 30 years.
And the prices keep going up, but the asset limits and that you can have to keep your Social Security and Medicaid, they haven't gone up since the 1980s. So I advocate for it. That's my main advocacy initiative. You can go to realwithit.com/reform to figure out exactly what we're trying to do. But I've been screaming at the wall. It feels like at the wall. I've been screaming at the wall for years. We have to raise these asset limits. We have to raise these asset limits, and hopefully somebody's gonna finally listen here soon. It's crazy. I don't.
It is, and so the reasons, as I said earlier, the reasons that are driving making everything more expensive is our government is so involved now in so many different things. Education has become much more expensive, although the quality of education has not gotten better, at least in the K through 12 area. Healthcare has gotten incredibly more expensive over the last 30 years.
Oh my God, yeah, that's.
And the high cost of healthcare is what drives the cost of everything else up. Because if somebody works in a grocery store, either the employer helps them pay for their health care, which they then have to add to the cost of the products, or it's a government funded program which increases the deficit, and that permeates through the cost of everything. The area of economics that I've looked at the most is trying to understand why our healthcare costs are so high and what can be done about it. And so if you're interested in talking about that, I would love to do that.
Yes. Why do you think? And let me just say, I have great insurance both on my private insurance side and the Medicaid that I'm on side. Virginia is one of the best states in the union for Medicaid, and I have an amazing private insurance policy as well. Not for me, but in general, why do you think healthcare has gone up so much?
First of all, let's go back and understand how our healthcare system came to be developed the way that it is now. And I will begin by saying that the way our healthcare system is financed is not natural. And when I say it's not natural, I mean that it is financed the way that it is because of government policy and not because it would be the way that it would be financed otherwise. So let me go back to the beginning. At the end of World War II, Roosevelt had put in wage and price controls. And toward the end of his life and the end of the war, business people went to Roosevelt and said, Mr. President, we're making a lot of money. If you want to keep price controls on, that's okay. But would you take off the wage controls so that we can pay our employees a higher wage? And Roosevelt's answer was, no, I won't take off wage controls, but I will let you pay for their health insurance. And I will let you tax deduct what you pay for their health insurance. And so since employees could not deduct the cost of insurance from their income, it made perfect sense for businesses to pay for insurance for their employees. And then in the 50s, the private sector unions then added healthcare to their union contracts, starting with the first dollar coverage. And that's very important. And I'll get to that in just a second. But then in the 60s, Medicaid was passed and Medicare was passed. And then in 2010, Obamacare was passed. And so you have a very large percentage of the population, and I'm on Medicare now. And so when I go see the doctor, or if I get any kind of a procedure done, if I need any kind of health care, I have no idea what the cost is because I'm not told. I'm not allowed to know. And there's nothing else that we buy where you're literally not allowed to know what the price is before you pay for it.
Yeah, if you went to a car dealership and they're like, oh yeah, we're not going to tell you this price till you get stuck with the bill.
At any rate, what I did, I'll tell you a couple of stories that I think are instructive. About 35 years ago, my wife needed to have a bunion removed from her foot. And she wanted to have it removed at the beginning of January so that she would have the first 2 months of the year during the wintertime to recover. And so I asked the doctor at that time, my small company had what was called a medical savings account, which meant that the plan would pay the first $3,000, I would pay the next $3,000 and then the insurance would kick in after that. So I asked the doctor, I said, how much are you going to get reimbursed? And he told me, he says, I will get reimbursed $1,500 to
What?
take off your wife's bunion. And this was 35 years ago. And
That's ridiculous.
now hold on, it gets even worse or gets stranger. Let's put it that way. So I said, well, tell me 5 places where you take off bunions. And he did. He did. And I called each of those 5 places and I told him who my insurance carrier was. And I said, what is your price? And the prices ranged. This is for the facility. Not
Yeah,
the
like they
doctor,
go to the hospital,
Yeah,
have the,
well,
yeah.
in this case, this was outpatient surgery. It was a surgery center, not a hospital, but a surgery center. And 'cause I was going to take my wife in, and then I'd put her in a wheelchair and put her back in my car 3 or 4 hours later. And so they said the low price was $4,200, and the high price was $6,000.
Oh my God.
And I wait. So then I asked one of them, I said, at the end, the last one, I said, what if I just paid you with credit card in full? And this was the one that was 4,200. And she said, you've told me you have insurance, so I can't change the price. It's 4,200. And I said, okay. And I said, and so she wouldn't say much else. And so I said, okay. I said, let me think about it. So then I waited about 10 days and I called all of them back. And I said, I don't have insurance for this. Can you give me a cash price? And the one that had told me it was 4,200 gave me a cash price of $1,556.
That
And,
is insane.
yes. And so what I have learned from my own experiences is that the cost of healthcare, if you did not have insurance, if you could literally pay in full, if you could pay in full, the cost of the healthcare would only be about 1/3 of what it is now, which means healthcare would be much more affordable if you could eliminate the third-party payment system for a portion of the care. Meaning if you drive a car, you have car insurance that pays for a wreck, but the car insurance doesn't pay for gasoline. The car insurance doesn't pay for tires. It doesn't pay if you have a transmission problem. It doesn't even pay for the car. And we help low income people buy groceries by giving them food stamps. And food is more important to life than healthcare. But in food, we let the market set the price and the selection, and then we give lower income people food stamps in order for them to be able to buy food at the grocery store, paying the market price and having the large selection. And so what I'm advocating is that we have widespread HSAs, health savings accounts, and we have total price transparency.
That are benefits protected, meaning they can't be counted against you for Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare, or any of those types.
There are 2 different elements here.
Yeah.
One is you have people who do need more help than the average person. Those people would get more help than the average person. But the goal, they would get larger HSAs. The goal here is to allow people to pay for their health care and have the prices very transparent, and then pay for them in full the day of service, and only have insurance, true insurance, for major medical, just like you have true insurance for a car wreck, or just like if you have homeowners insurance, if your house burns down or something catastrophic happens to your house. But if you have a plumber come, you have to pay for it. If you have an electrician come, you have to pay for it. If your refrigerator breaks, you have to pay for it. And people can do that. It's not convenient, but they can. And that's what keeps the price of all of these other things much lower. And so healthcare, we need to figure out a way so that as much of healthcare as possible can be paid for in full and have the prices transparent. I want to tell you a story, one more story. My doctor, as I got older, my doctor said, I'd like you to go to this imaging center here in Nashville, and I'd like you to have a heart scan. And they'll take it's like an MRI for your heart. And you go have that done, and you send it, and they'll send it electronically to my doctor for him to look at it. And he said, now they don't have insurance. That's not an insured service. So I go over there, and I'm going to pay in full, and they were going to do an MRI on my heart and electronically send that image of my heart to my doctor. So I lay down on this little slide, and it goes into a machine that takes an image of my heart. The cost of that, $75.
Holy crap!
$75. Now, I can call an MRI center and get an MRI for $300 to $400. But if it's insured, it's $1,500.
Yeah.
And this is the problem that you have. The third party payment system employs 3 million people. There are actually more people who work for insurance companies than there are people who work for hospitals. And the third party payment system has to collect enough money to pay for all of that, plus pay the hospitals. And then the hospitals have to have a whole bunch of additional employees who are working with the insurance companies. Same thing with doctor's office, same thing with surgery centers. And so if you want to make life much more affordable for younger people, because younger people are generally very healthy. And so if people who are younger and who are healthy, if they had an HSA and they weren't using their HSA, then the money would accumulate in their HSA account and it would become a savings account for them. Other people who need the coverage would still get the coverage they need, but they would get it at a lower total cost. So to me, that's the problem. I've tried to explain what the genesis of the problem was. And
Yes,
that was going
I
back.
think you did a very good job.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I had to listen to it twice, but I think you did a pretty good job. So
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
why do you think rent is so high?
The cost of building has gone up considerably in the last 20 or 30 years. Also, the cost of getting permits to do building, those have become much, much more expensive. So people who are building apartment buildings are having to pay 2 times as much or 3 times as much, depending on the location, to build than they did 20 years ago. If you have to pay twice as much to build an apartment, then in order to justify building the apartment, you have to charge twice as much rent because you paid twice as much to build it. And building materials and permitting costs and labor costs and all these things, they are all affected in many ways by the very high cost of health insurance. Because for somebody who's building an apartment complex, somebody is paying for their health insurance. And then they have to then put that into the cost of labor or the cost of the materials. And then the other factor that you have to deal with is that our federal debt is now $38 trillion, which is a number
insane.
That's a number that's so large that the human mind doesn't understand what 38 trillion is. But what we do know is that the interest on that debt is now the single largest expense of the government, and that debt burden affects everybody equally. And so if you're a younger person, you didn't benefit from that debt. You didn't benefit from the accumulation of that debt, but yet you're stuck with having to share your part of the burden. And so what we have to do is we have to figure out ways to reduce the amount of government spending. And as I said earlier, one way to do it is to greatly reduce the third-party payment system in health insurance, but still provide for the same quality of care but just at a lower price because you've eliminated. It'd be like going to the grocery store and being required when you go to the grocery store to have two people walking along with you monitoring your shopping,
Yes,
and then being required to pay for their labor when you buy your groceries. And our health insurance system has just way too many people involved in the payment system, and that's the problem.
Can we talk about how many are on Medicaid that don't even need to be on Medicaid real quick? I mean, there is
Sure.
a legitimate need for Medicaid, and a lot of people that people say don't need to be on Medicaid actually do, but there's also a tremendous amount that don't need to be on it.
Right.
And
Now, so your point is exactly correct. And the reason that so many people are on Medicaid is that states only pay for a very small part of Medicaid, and the federal government pays for the great majority of it. This is also true with Obamacare. And so it behooves the state to actually spend as much money as it can on Medicaid, because for every dollar that the state spends, the federal government will put $2 into that state's economy. And in Obamacare, for every dollar that the state spends, the federal government will put in $4.
that is insane.
And so you have cities now, you have cities who have a 30-year retirement program for their employees. And so if the employee goes to work for the city at, say, age 22, when they're 52, they're able to retire on full benefits. And one of those benefits is a very good health care program. The cities can't afford that. So what they're now doing is they're taking those retired 52-year-olds and putting them on Obamacare.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So all of this, it's all about incentives. And state governments have learned that if they spend a small amount on health care of their own money, the federal government will put multiple times what the state spends in their state, and that boosts their state economy.
That's insane. Anything else that we covered a lot, but anything else you want to add before we get off here?
No, those are that we've talked about the high cost of living, affordability, and kind of some of the problems there and how to make things more affordable. Just complaining about affordability doesn't solve the problem. So we have to identify it. Then we have to come up with solutions that make sense. And I hope I've offered some ideas for your listeners.
Yes, you have, and we will have you back on.
I sure appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right. And where can people get in touch with you?
The one thing I'd love for them to do, we do have a podcast called From Our Generation, and that's on Spotify. And then, but the most,
is it on Apple too? And YouTube?
I believe so. I believe so. And then the other thing is that I would encourage people to go to giantsofpoliticalthought.com and look at all of the great thinkers whose ideas we cover. If they are so inclined, they can buy the series, and then they download the app, and then those audio programs are then on their phone, plus the transcripts are on their phone, plus some questions. And they can share the content with up to 5 devices. So you can share it with other family members. And I know I personally have benefited by understanding the power of ideas as expressed by great historical thinkers. And some of their ideas I don't agree with, but all of their ideas were very powerfully presented. And that's what's important.
That's amazing. So we will have all those links in the show notes, and we will see you guys next episode. Bye, guys.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to follow the show and our guests on social media and subscribe. Be sure to hit the bell so you'll get notified when we upload new episodes. See you next time.